It's been a year since Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine. Although there are still a lot of questions about the Russian government's actions, the big picture is much clearer now that the dust has settled. Let's take a look at the timeline of events surrounding Crimea's deceptive annexation. Violent anti-government protests sparked the Ukrainian revolution and the ousting of President Viktor Yanukovych. Russian President Vladimir Putin holds a secret meeting about extracting the deposed Yanukovych and annexing Crimea from Ukraine. Heavily armed pro-Russian gunmen occupy the Crimean parliament and allegedly force the emergency instatement of a new pro-Russian prime minister. The new Crimean prime minister takes control of Ukraine's security forces and officially asks Russia to provide assistance in assuring peace. Russia pledges the use of their armed forces in Ukraine. President Putin tells reporters that the unidentified soldiers occupying Crimean military bases are not Russian and says that Russia will not try to annex Crimea. A planned referendum to accede Crimea to Russia is condemned by the Ukrainian government, the US and the EU. Russia announces massive military exercises along the Ukrainian border. The US Department of State calls this an intimidation attempt in the lead-up to the referendum. Officials report that 95.5% of Crimean voters support joining Russia in the referendum, but many residents abstain. No international observation of the vote is allowed. The Crimean parliament officially joins the Russian Federation. US President Barack Obama announces sanctions against Russian and Ukrainian officials. The G8 votes to oust Russia over the unconstitutional referendum. They become the G7. Additionally, 100 countries support a UN resolution calling the March 16th referendum illegal. Russia accidentally releases documents suggesting the referendum vote may have been falsified. President Vladimir Putin admits that despite originally denying any involvement, the invasion and annexation of Crimea was planned all along. In the year since, a number of hard-hitting sanctions have been imposed on Russia by the United States and their international allies, crippling the Russian economy. In spite of widespread condemnation, Putin has made no concessions regarding Crimea and may have his eye on the rest of Ukraine.
The EU has imposed sanctions on Russia following its actions in Ukraine. These include the violation of Ukrainian sovereignty and the illegal annexation of Crimea and Sevastopol by Russia, inflows of fighters and weapons from Russia into eastern Ukraine. A foreign policy tool, the measures do not target the Russian population. They aim to bring about a change in Russian policy towards Ukraine. The EU remains ready to reverse its decisions and re-engage with Russia when it changes its policy, including by starting to contribute actively and without ambiguity to finding a solution to the Ukrainian crisis. The European Union regularly reassesses the sanctions and communicates openly about them.
I always said, and I can repeat it today, sanctions in themselves are not an objective, are a tool, and I think that everybody wishes that this situation can be overcome as soon as possible, but this needs to be linked to an improvement of the situation on the ground in the east of Ukraine.
Following a decision taken by the member states with unanimity, the economic sanctions will remain in place until the complete implementation of the Minsk agreements. This includes restoring Ukrainian control of its borders in the east. "146 persons involved in undermining Ukraine's territorial integrity are subject to asset freezes and visa bans. 37 entities have had their assets frozen in the EU. Additionally, economic sanctions include limiting access to EU capital markets for Russian state-owned financial institutions and restricting access to certain sensitive technologies, particularly in the oil and military sectors. The EU has not limited the export of foodstuffs to Russia. That decision was taken by the Russian authorities.
Good morning, everybody. In recent months, as the citizens of Ukraine have made their voices heard, we have been guided by a fundamental principle. The future of Ukraine must be decided by the people of Ukraine. That means Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected, and international law must be upheld. And so Russia's decision to send troops into Crimea has rightly drawn global condemnation. From the start, the United States has mobilized the international community in support of Ukraine to isolate Russia for its actions and to reassure our allies and partners. We saw this international unity again over the weekend when Russia stood alone in the UN Security Council defending its actions in Crimea. And as I told President Putin yesterday, the referendum in Crimea was a clear violation of Ukrainian constitutions and international law, and it will not be recognized by the international community. Today I'm announcing a series of measures that will continue to increase the costs on Russia and on those responsible for what is happening in Ukraine. First, as authorized by the executive order I signed 2 weeks ago, we are imposing sanctions on specific individuals responsible for undermining the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and government of Ukraine. We're making it clear that there are consequences for their actions. Second, I have signed a new executive order that expands the scope of our sanctions. As an initial step, I'm authorizing sanctions on Russian officials, entities operating in the arms sector in Russia, and individuals who provide material support to senior officials of the Russian government. And if Russia continues to interfere in Ukraine, we stand ready to impose further sanctions. Third, we're continuing our close consultations with our European partners, who today in Brussels moved ahead with their own sanctions against Russia. Tonight, Vice President Biden departs for Europe, where he will meet with the leaders of our NATO allies, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And I'll be traveling to Europe next week. Our message will be clear. As NATO allies, we have a solemn commitment to our collective defense, and we will uphold this commitment. Fourth, we'll continue to make clear to Russia that further provocations will achieve nothing except to further isolate Russia and diminish its place in the world. The international community will continue to stand together to oppose any violations of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. And continued Russian military intervention in Ukraine will only deepen Russia's diplomatic isolation and exact a greater toll on the Russian economy. Going forward, we can calibrate our response based on whether Russia chooses to escalate or to de-escalate the situation. Now, I believe there's still a path to resolve this situation diplomatically in a way that addresses the interests of both Russia and Ukraine. That includes Russia pulling its forces in Crimea back to their bases, supporting the deployment of additional international monitors in Ukraine, and engaging in dialogue with the Ukrainian government, which has indicated its openness to pursuing constitutional reform as they move forward towards elections this spring. But throughout this process, we're going to stand firm in our unwavering support for Ukraine. As I told Prime Minister Yatsenyuk last week, the United States stands with the people of Ukraine and their right to determine their own destiny. We're going to keep working with Congress and our international partners to offer Ukraine the economic support that it needs to weather this crisis and to improve the daily lives of the Ukrainian people. And as we go forward, we'll continue to look at the range of ways we can help our Ukrainian friends achieve their universal rights and the security, prosperity, and dignity that they deserve.
So I just tell you, we're battling a lot of things, but we're battling the press because the press is very dishonest, okay? Press is very dishonest. So as an example, I gave a very good answer over the weekend to one of the shows on Russia going into the Ukraine. I said very simply, they're not going to do it on my watch, essentially. I said, Russia will not go into the Ukraine. Now, I said that. And the next day, the story comes out, and we really let it roll a little bit. Actually, I think it was USA Today. A couple of them covered it accurately, what I said. But a couple of papers said, Donald Trump doesn't realize that the Crimea was already taken. I know it exactly, 2 years ago, approximately. Okay, approximately. It was taken during Obama's watch. So when I said, believe me, Russia's not going into Ukraine, all right? They're not going into Ukraine. the person said, but they're already in Ukraine. I said, yeah, well, that was 2 years ago. I mean, you want to go back? You want to have World War III to get it back? That was during Obama's watch. So during Obama's watch, you know, all the tough guy statements, right? So he talks about Donald Trump is not strong on Russia. First of all, I have to say this. Wouldn't it be great if we actually got along with Russia? Am I wrong in saying that? Wouldn't it be great? Okay? You know, Russia, like us, has nuclear weapons, folks. It would be really nice if we got along with Russia and others that we don't get along with right now. And wouldn't it be nice if we teamed up with Russia and others, including surrounding states and maybe NATO, and we knocked the hell out of ISIS and got rid of these people? Wouldn't that be nice? Right? But even beyond that, Putin said some very good things about me. People say, oh, Trump's going to be weak with Putin because Putin is saying nice things about me. Okay, all right. And I said he's a strong guy. They immediately say, oh, Trump likes Putin. Look, I don't like or dislike. I just say it this way. Wouldn't it be great if the United States and Russia got along, combined, knocked out ISIS, maybe it did other positive things? You know, we forced them, through stupidity, into an alliance with China. You know why? Because of oil, because China needs oil. We were driving them both crazy. They formed. And from the time I was a young guy, I've always learned, don't ever let China and Russia get together. We forced them together. Obama forced them together because he didn't get along with either. And they eventually, China came in and said, let's make a deal on oil. They're together. In fact, they're doing naval exercises together someplace. And you look at China. They're building one of the largest military installations in the world, right smack in the middle of the South China Sea. And then they talk about Donald Trump and Russia, or Donald Trump. And believe me, folks, somebody can say nice things about me. He did call me a genius, but these are minor details. Somebody can say nice things about me. It makes no difference. It makes no difference, all right? I've been dealing a long time. A lot of times I'll make much better deals with people that say terrible things about me. I don't care what they say about me. I want the deal. You know, on trade, one of the people that's standing back there, one of the dishonest media, well, what's your definition of trade? I said, well, you have fair trade. You have all sorts, you have so many different types of trade. But here's my definition of trade, because right now we're being ripped off. $500 billion trade deficit with China. $500 billion. And they give us